with this philosophical understanding, the whole development of culture and philosophy and thought, and then you became exposed to this encounter with God, and then you began some kind of a journey that transformed you, and then made you ultimately a major shaping influence in Christianity.
Well, one of the things that helped me was I couldn't go to church because in the circumstance we were posted to the Middle East within a few weeks after that experience.
What year was this?
1941.
41, okay.
And we were in the deserts, Egypt, Libya, the Sudan, for about 3 years. Basically, there was no church, and very often there was even no padre. So all I had was the Bible. So I read the Bible through twice in that period. Well, when I started going to church, I discovered there were a lot of things in the Bible that they didn't tell me in the church. So by the grace of God, I had been, as it were, prepared for a pretty radical brand of Christianity.
And from 1941 till when?
Well, in 1944, I was posted to what was then Palestine, which is now Israel. And that got me out of the desert. And I eventually was posted to Jerusalem, which was what I had my eye on. And I did my last year of military service in a military hospital, which is now known as the Augusta Victoria building, up on the Mount of Olives.
Obviously, from this side of things and looking at it from a historical perspective, God was uniquely preparing and positioning you to have that exposure to the land of Israel, and getting you ready for another whole chapter of life that would be unfolding.
It was a period of transition, really, from Eton and Cambridge to a very humble children's home in Jerusalem.
Now, when you departed active service in the Army, would that have been 44 or 45?
46.
46. Okay.
Early 46.
And then explain to us the transition that took place to the children's home.
Well, when I was in the Sudan, some other Christian soldiers said, if you really want a blessing, there's a little children's home in Jerusalem. You should go there because you'll get blessed. So when I got to Jerusalem, I sought out this children's home, which was run by a Danish former school teacher named Lydia Christensen. And I got my blessing. But I got more than that because I got a wife. And so I can't go into the details, but Lydia and I married, and I became the head of this children's home, which contained 8 girls and an Arab maid and Lydia.
Well, let me ask you a moment. You say you can't go into the details. You said that twice, once earlier and then now. But I'd like you to go into the details. I'd like
Well,
to have
Lydia
some of
was,
that detail.
was much older than me, and I had a tremendous admiration for her. I also was tremendously blessed in the children's home. It was really like a little piece of heaven in the midst of a very grim, ugly world. And then, before I moved to Jerusalem, I was praying for this poor Danish lady who had so many children and so little money. And the Lord spoke to me. He used to speak to me through tongues and interpretation, if you know what that is. And he said, I've joined you together under the same yoke and in the same harness.
This was before you met her?
I had met her, but I hadn't moved. So I thought, well, that means we're going to work together. So when I got to Jerusalem, I went to see her and I said, I believe the Lord would have us to work together. Her response was absolutely typical. She said, he'll have to work on both ends of the chain. But he did work on both ends of the chain. And only after we were married did I realize that when he said under the same yoke, that was marriage, in the same harness, that was service. And we actually served the Lord together for 30 years from that time onward. So I have to say God has supernaturally directed my life right from the first, and is still doing so.
Now, obviously, when you did wed with Lydia, you gained an instant family,
That's right.
and it wasn't a small family.
No.
Can you explain a little bit about
Well, when I married Lydia, she had 8 girls in her children's home, and she was mother to them.
that? Now, these were orphan children.
Well, they're not necessarily orphan, but they're children without parents, let's put it that way. And so when I married her, I became father to them, which was a pretty severe transition because I was an only child. I never had brothers or sisters, and I really didn't know much about females, to say the truth. But I had to learn. Everybody had to learn. And furthermore, we got married in a very troubled time. Shortly after we were married, the fighting broke out amongst the Jews and the Arabs that eventually resulted in the birth of the State of Israel. And during that period, we had to flee from our house in the middle of the night twice to save our lives. So we were under a good deal of pressure, as well as the adjustments within the home.
What were those circumstances?
Well, again, the thing is, my stories are complicated. I try to keep them simple. One of the girls had gone out to get a music lesson, and they're Jewish, but they all spoke Arabic. And when she came back, there was a truck full of Arab Legion soldiers at the front door, talking to the Arab office boy who kept the premises down below. And she knew that was strange, so instead of going through the front door, she went around the back of the house, up the side door, got on her hands and knees, crawled out onto the balcony, and listened to what they were saying. And she's fluent in Arabic. And they were saying, how many people are there in this house, and who are they? And they say, they're mostly Jewish girls, and the oldest is such and such an age. Well, they said, how would it be if we come back later? And the office boy said, well, if you come back at midnight, there'll be nobody around.
What was being implied there was that they would kill you?
Kill or rape, yes. I mean, I'm a realist. I'm talking about the Middle East. That's all. I mean, everybody knows what will happen. So this happened at 7 o'clock in the evening. At 9 o'clock, we filed out into the absolutely deserted streets of Jerusalem, because fighting had started and there were snipers shooting at people, so people didn't go out in the dark. And we wandered through the streets of Jerusalem and eventually came to a British military zone which was surrounded by barbed wire higher than this ceiling. But we had no authority to go in. You could only go in with a pass. But we had visiting with us a British constable in the Palestinian police, and he came with us as a kind of escort. And he said, I can get in, I'll go in and ask the commanding officer if he'll let you in. So we stood out there outside this barbed wire for about half an hour, and the British soldier was very courteous. He was sitting in a little sandbag pillbox, and he got up and gave his seat to Lydia. And then the constable came back and he said, it's all right, you can all come in. So we trooped in, and we knew there was an Assembly of God mission building right in the middle of Jerusalem. So about 11 o'clock at night we said, here we are, can you help us? And they did. They took us in, they provided mattresses and so on. But 2 days later, the missionary in charge of the building came to me and he said, Mr. Prince, you and Mrs. Prince are welcome to stay, but the girls will have to go. So I said, why? He said, we've received a message from the Muslims that if you keep the Jewish girls in that house, they'll burn it down. And he said, we have a pregnant woman here, we can't do that. So I said to him, well, we're one family, where the girls go, we go, and where we go, they go. So next day we were out on the street again. And we ended up in another missionary, a British Pentecostal missionary building. And there we spent Christmas of that year, 1947. It was really in no man's land. At night, the two warring groups would come out and fight one another all around the house. And we couldn't walk past the window. We had to duck down and crawl past the window. Well, then the American missionaries decided to leave, and they wanted somebody to take charge of this building. So they came to Lydia and me and said, will you move in? So we moved in with great satisfaction. And that's where we were living when the State of Israel was born, 14th of May, 1948. But it was a tough time. We were about less than half a mile from the front line, which had just developed, you know, where one end and the other began. And we could never walk out of the front door of our house because we would be shot at. So we had to walk out of another door, walk down the street, and then turn right, and we could make it.
Do you remember where you actually were when the State of Israel came into existence? Do you remember that day?
Well, that's where we were. But the dramatic moment was we were living in the sub-basement. I mean, you know, as far down as you could go with sandbags in front of the door. But every now and then I would sneak up to the attic and look out, see what's going on. And when I was there I suppose the 15th of May, I saw the Israeli flag, you know, go up over one of the main buildings in the center of Jerusalem, which was then Barclays Bank. It's now a municipal building. And I thought to myself, that is history.